The committee room was already tense when Kari Lake leaned into her microphone, her voice carrying the sharp edge of a campaign rally. "Congresswoman Crockett," she began, "how many more American families have to suffer because leaders like you refuse to enforce our borders?" The words were crafted to provoke, and they did. Cameras tilted toward Jasmine Crockett, who sat back in her chair for a beat, letting the silence stretch just enough to make Lake's question hang in the air. "Ms. Lake," Crockett said evenly, "what I refuse to enforce is the kind of fearmongering that turns human lives into political props. You talk about families suffering, but you're not talking about the families torn apart in detention centers, or the American farmers who can't get crops harvested because your policies cut off their workforce." Lake smirked, ready with another volley. "So your plan is open borders?" she shot back. Crockett leaned forward now, voice firm. "My plan is secure borders and a moral compass. The problem is, you've got one without the other, and that's why your version of security looks a lot more like cruelty." The committee murmured. A few aides exchanged glances. Lake's smile faltered just slightly, but she masked it with a glance at her notes. Crockett didn't wait for her to recover. "And since you brought up suffering, maybe we should talk about the millions in emergency relief your state turned away while you were chasing headlines instead of solutions." The tension spiked. Reporters' pens started moving again. This wasn't going to be a polite exchange, it was going to be a fight. Lake straightened her stack of papers, but the stiffness in her posture gave away that Crockett's last point had landed. "Congresswoman," she said, voice clipped, "you can twist the facts all you want, but the reality is that lax border policies lead to more crime, more drugs, and more danger for American citizens. I'm here to protect them." Crockett's eyes narrowed slightly, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Protect them," she repeated. "Like you protected the thousands of asylum seekers you left stranded in dangerous camps without due process? Or maybe you mean protecting them the way you slashed funding for community policing in your own backyard, while telling the cameras you were tough on crime." Lake opened her mouth to respond, but Crockett didn't give her the chance. "You love to talk about crime, Ms. Lake. So let's talk numbers. According to your own state's data, violent crime went up during your tenure, while you were too busy staging press conferences at the border to notice." The room rippled with murmurs. Lake's jaw tightened. She glanced toward the chair as if hoping for an intervention, but the chair's gavel stayed still. "This isn't about keeping America safe," Crockett continued, her voice now low and deliberate. "It's about keeping your name in headlines. And if fear is the currency you deal in, I'm here to bankrupt your account." The blow landed. Lake's eyes narrowed, but for the first time, she didn't fire back immediately. The cameras caught it. Crockett had shifted the momentum. Crockett reached into her folder and pulled out a thick packet bound with red tape. She held it up so the cameras, and Kari Lake, could see. "This," Crockett began, "is the Homeland Security Oversight Report from last quarter. It's not from me, it's not from some think tank, it's your own government's audit." She flipped it open, her finger running down highlighted lines. Page 47, Section 3. No significant evidence supports the claim that asylum seekers are a primary source of violent crime in border states. That's not my opinion, Ms. Lake. That's the data you conveniently ignore. Lake rolled her eyes. Data can be manipulated. Crockett cut in sharply. Manipulated? The only thing being manipulated here is the public's fear. And you're the one pulling the strings. You push a narrative that anyone crossing the border is a criminal, when the truth is, many are fleeing from the very violence you're pretending to fight. She turned another page. And here's the kicker, while you've been preaching border security on television, your own administration failed to spend allocated federal funds for security infrastructure, money that could have actually made the border safer. The committee buzzed with quiet shock. Reporters' fingers tapped faster on their keyboards. Lake opened her mouth but no words came out immediately. Crockett's voice sharpened. So if you want to talk about who's endangering Americans, Ms. Lake, maybe start with the leader who left critical safety measures unfunded because she was too busy chasing political clout. Lake's expression froze for a beat, long enough for the cameras to catch it. Crockett closed the report, sliding it aside like she'd just played the opening move in a chess match she already knew she'd win. "But this isn't just about your policies, Ms. Lake," she said, voice calm but edged with steel. "It's about your record. And your record has a funny way of contradicting your speeches." Lake tilted her head, her smile tight. "Oh, I'm sure you're about to enlighten us." Crockett didn't miss a beat. "In 2019, you stood on a stage in Phoenix and told voters that America needs to live up to its promise as a nation of opportunity. Those were your words, Ms. Lake, your campaign slogan, in fact. Yet here you are, 4 years later, branding families as threats because it's politically convenient." Lake shifted in her seat. "That was taken out of context." "Out of context?" Crockett's tone sharpened. "I have the full video. You were talking about immigrants, legal and undocumented, working toward the American dream. Now you call those same people criminals on sight. If that's not hypocrisy, I don't know what is." A low murmur ran through the room. Crockett pressed on. "And let's not forget the contracts your administration signed with private detention facilities that faced multiple human rights complaints. You funneled taxpayer dollars into those cages, Ms. Lake, while telling the public you were keeping communities safe." Lake's lips pressed into a thin line. Her hands tightened on the stack of papers in front of her. The cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of discomfort. "This obsession of yours isn't about safety," Crockett finished. "It's about power, and the more people you can turn into enemies, the more you think you'll keep it." Lake's fingers drummed against the desk now, each tap louder than the last. "You know, Congresswoman," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the murmurs in the room, "I'm tired of this holier-than-thou lecture. You sit here in Washington, far from the chaos at the border, and act like you know what it's like for the people who live it every day." Crockett didn't flinch. "I've been to the border, Ms. Lake. I've spoken with families, law enforcement, aid workers, the actual people living it every day. And what they told me doesn't match your talking points." Lake leaned in, her voice rising. "You wouldn't last a week in Arizona dealing with the flood of illegal crossings, the cartels, the violence." "That's funny," Crockett interrupted, "because the sheriffs in your own state have testified, under oath, that your policies make their jobs harder. They've said that focusing on mass deportations instead of targeted enforcement wastes resources and makes everyone less safe." Lake's face flushed, her voice climbing higher. "That's a lie." "It's in the transcripts, Ms. Lake," Crockett shot back, her voice unwavering. "But I guess transcripts don't make good campaign ads, do they?" The audience, journalists, aides, even a few other committee members, shifted forward in their seats. Lake's composure was cracking, and Crockett knew it. "You want to talk about who wouldn't last a week?" Crockett leaned forward, her tone like a blade. "Try surviving a week without scapegoating immigrants for every problem in your state. That would be a real test of leadership." Lake's lips pressed together, her jaw flexing. The silence that followed was almost louder than her shouting had been. Crockett took a slow breath, letting the tension in the room simmer before she struck again. "You know, Ms. Lake," she began, voice quieter now but carrying a weight that drew everyone in, "when I was a public defender, I sat across from clients whose only crime was crossing a border to save their child from being killed. One of them was a mother from Guatemala, her son was 12. She worked in the fields during the day, cleaned offices at night, and still sent him to school every morning. That boy is now a college graduate, serving in the U.S. Army." She locked eyes with Lake. "Under your policies, that mother would have been on a bus back across the border before she could even plead her case. Her son? Left alone in a shelter, just another statistic for you to talk about on the news." Lake tried to interject, but Crockett raised her hand slightly, not to silence her, but to signal that the floor was hers. "You talk about protecting families, Ms. Lake, but what you really mean is protecting a narrow definition of family, one that excludes anyone who doesn't fit your campaign narrative. That's not leadership. That's moral bankruptcy." A hush fell over the committee room. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. Even a few members on Lake's side looked uneasy. "This isn't just about policy, it's about people," Crockett continued. "And until you can look a mother like that in the eye and tell her she's less deserving of safety because of where she was born, you don't get to call yourself a defender of American values." Lake's knuckles whitened around her pen. The cameras caught the moment, and Crockett knew it. This would be the clip replayed in every highlight reel. Lake leaned forward, desperation creeping into her voice. "Congresswoman, you can stand here and moralize all day, but the American people want action, not lectures. They're tired of feeling unsafe in their own neighborhoods because of people who shouldn't be here in the first place." Crockett let her finish, just long enough for the tension to stretch. Then she leaned in, meeting Lake's gaze head-on. "Unsafe," she said softly, almost conversationally. "The only thing they're unsafe from is the truth you're too scared to admit. Immigrants don't destroy communities, politicians like you do." The words landed like a gavel strike. The air in the room seemed to shift. A few gasps broke out from the audience, even some committee members froze mid-note. Lake's eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. She couldn't, not without making the moment bigger. Crockett knew it, and so did the cameras. "That's the difference between us, Ms. Lake," Crockett continued. "You're chasing fear. I'm chasing facts. And facts don't need walls, they need courage." The clip was already destined to go viral. Reporters' phones lit up as they texted the line to their editors. The chair cleared his throat, but even he seemed reluctant to cut the moment short. Crockett leaned back, letting silence punctuate her words. She'd just given them the headline. The room didn't just react, it shifted. Conversations broke out in whispers, the kind of hushed tones that still carried tension in every syllable. A few reporters were already halfway out the door, racing to file what they knew would be the quote of the day. Crockett remained seated, calm as if she'd simply recited a weather forecast, while across the table Lake's posture had changed, her shoulders slightly hunched, her hands no longer gripping her notes but fidgeting with the edges. From the press row, camera flashes began popping, aimed almost exclusively at Crockett. One photographer caught the exact moment Lake avoided eye contact, staring instead at the papers in front of her like they might offer a lifeline. In the overflow room where staffers and journalists watched the live feed, Crockett's last line was already being clipped and replayed on loop. Phones lit up as the snippet spread to social media, each re-uploaded video carrying captions like, "Crockett ends it in one line," and "Lake left speechless." Back in the hearing room, the chair attempted to move on to the next speaker, but the momentum was gone, for everyone but Crockett. She had taken control of the narrative, and the silence that followed Lake's failed counterpunch was proof. Even a few of Lake's allies sat with furrowed brows, realizing this exchange wasn't one they could spin in her favor. Not today. The moment the hearing adjourned, Kari Lake moved fast, straight out the side exit, trailed by two aides who kept their eyes locked forward, avoiding the press waiting in the hallway. Still, the cameras caught the flush on her cheeks and the way she brushed past questions without a single word. In the press room, it was a feeding frenzy. The clip of Crockett's "Immigrants don't destroy communities, politicians like you do" line was already plastered across cable news tickers. One network cut it into a split-screen montage, Crockett speaking with razor precision on one side, Lake's stunned silence on the other. Political analysts weighed in within minutes. Some called it a career-defining exchange for Crockett, others said it was the moment Lake's "tough on immigration" image took its first real hit. On social media, hashtags like #CrockettClapback and #LakeShutdown began trending nationally. Behind closed doors, Lake's team huddled in a cramped conference room. A junior staffer nervously pointed out that multiple Arizona outlets were running headlines questioning her credibility on border security. One even quoted a former state sheriff saying, "Crockett did what nobody else could, she made Lake look small." Meanwhile, Crockett stepped into the corridor outside the chamber, smiling politely as reporters swarmed. She offered only one comment, I'm not here for political theater, I'm here for the truth. It was short, direct, and calculated, because she knew the real theater was already playing out online. As Crockett stepped outside into the crisp air, the sound of shutters and rapid-fire questions followed her like an echo of the battle she'd just won. She paused for a moment at the top of the steps, scanning the crowd, not with the smugness of victory, but with the steady calm of someone who knew she'd just changed the conversation. Behind her, the heavy doors of the Capitol closed with a dull thud, sealing in the chaos she'd left behind. Inside, Kari Lake was likely still huddled with advisors, crafting statements that would never hit as hard as the moment everyone had already seen. A young reporter squeezed through the cluster of microphones and called out, "Congresswoman, do you think today will shift the immigration debate?" Crockett smiled faintly, meeting the reporter's eyes. "If telling the truth shifts the debate," she said, "then maybe we should all start doing it more often." It wasn't a victory lap, it was an exclamation point. As she descended the steps, phones in the crowd buzzed with alerts, cable news playing her one-liner on loop, opinion pieces already framing the moment as a turning point. Hashtags burned brighter. Clips spread faster. The narrative was no longer in Kari Lake's hands, it was in Crockett's, and she knew exactly what to do with it. Today wasn't about winning a headline, it was about holding the line. We can't keep letting fear dictate policy, or allow political ambition to twist the truth into something unrecognizable. Every person who comes to this country seeking safety deserves to be seen as more than a statistic or a campaign prop. Ms. Lake came here with talking points, I came here with facts. And facts have a way of cutting through the noise. The choice we face as a nation isn't between security and compassion, we can have both, but only if we lead with integrity. If this exchange made one person think twice about the stories they've been fed, then today was worth it. I'll keep showing up, I'll keep speaking up, and I'll keep reminding anyone who'll listen, courage means telling the truth, even when it's inconvenient.